We didn't break up because the love disappeared. If anything, that was the cruel part. It was still there, sitting between us, breathing quietly, refusing to die. We broke up because fear is louder than affection when you don't know how to name it. And we were terrible at naming things. I keep thinking about the last morning we woke up together, how ordinary it felt. No shouting, no tears, just that heavy, muted quiet that settles in when a decision has already been made, even if no one said it out loud yet. Caleb was still asleep when I got up. I stood in the kitchen in my socks, staring at the coffee machine like it might tell me what to do next. The apartment smelled like detergent and toast crumbs, and always him. I remember thinking that if I stayed still long enough, maybe time would stall out of pity. It hadn't always been like this. When we first met, it felt reckless in the best way. We were both supposed to be not looking for anything serious, which of course meant we were lying to ourselves. We slid into each other's lives quietly, dinners that turned into mornings, toothbrushes that never left. It was easy, too easy. The first time fear showed up, I didn't recognize it. I thought it was just nerves. Caleb talking about renewing his lease. Me joking about how our bookshelves already looked married. We laughed, but something tightened in my chest, and I ignored it because ignoring things was kind of my specialty. Caleb was braver than me. Not loud brave, honest brave. He'd ask questions that required real answers. What do you see yourself in a year? Do you ever think about leaving the city? Do you think this could last? I'd answer with half smiles and deflections, like if I didn't fully commit to the words, they couldn't trap me. One night, lying in bed, he said, "You know you can want this, right?" His voice was gentle, like he was talking to a scared animal. I said I did. I'm in it. I was just terrified of what wanting something that much could cost. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers practical things. What if you grow apart? What if you hurt each other? What if this ends badly and you lose not just the relationship, but the version of yourself that feels safe right now? I listened to those whispers more than I listened to him. The night we ended it, nothing dramatic happened. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, knees not touching. A crime show paused on the TV. Caleb rubbed his hands together like he was cold. "I feel like I'm standing still," he said. "And you're already halfway out the door, even when you're right here." I wanted to argue. I wanted to promise things I wasn't sure I could deliver. Instead, I went quiet. Silence has always been my worst habit. After he left, the apartment felt wrong. Too big, too quiet. I slept on my side of the bed out of instinct, like my body hadn't caught up yet. In the morning, I noticed he'd lined up his shoes neatly by the door, the way he always did. That almost broke me. We didn't stop loving each other that night. We just chose fear because it felt safer than risking everything. And sometimes, lying awake now, I wonder if that was the bravest choice we were capable of at the time or the most cowardly. The question sits with me, unanswered, not sharp enough to hurt anymore, but heavy enough that I still feel it when I breathe. The weeks after the breakup blurred together in a way that made time feel unreliable. Some days stretched painfully long, others vanished without leaving any memory behind. I kept expecting the ache to peak and then fade, like an illness with a predictable recovery. Instead, it settled into me. Quiet, persistent, almost polite. Caleb and I tried to do the mature thing. We texted, checked in, asked how work was going, used words like space and processing as if they were safety rails. Every message felt carefully edited, like we were both afraid that one wrong sentence might crack something open we didn't know how to close again. I replayed moments constantly, not the fights we barely had any but the almost. Almost moving in together, almost meeting his parents, almost saying yes without hesitation. It felt ridiculous to mourn things that never technically happened. But loss doesn't care about technicalities. One night, I caught myself scrolling through old photos of us on my phone, thumb hovering like it was afraid of what it might touch next. Caleb smiling on my couch, hair damp after a shower. Us reflected in a dark window, barely visible but unmistakably together. I didn't cry. I just stared until my chest felt tight and unfamiliar. We ran into each other by accident at a corner grocery store. Of all places, I almost walked right past him, but my body recognized him before my brain could catch up. He looked the same, which somehow hurt more than if he'd changed completely. "Hey," he said. Just that. No drama. No bitterness. "Hey," I answered, like it was a word I hadn't practiced in a while. We stood there between the produce and the refrigerated drinks, holding baskets like props. He asked how I'd been. I told him the truth in the safest way possible. "Fine. Busy. Adjusting." He nodded, eyes lingering a second too long, like he was reading something I wasn't saying. "I miss you," he said quietly. Not as a plea, just a fact. My instinct was to protect both of us. I shrugged, tried to make it smaller. "Yeah, me too." What I didn't say was how much. How fear still sat in my throat, unchanged. How wanting him hadn't gone away just because we decided not to choose each other. That night, alone again, I finally admitted something I'd been circling for weeks. Love hadn't been the problem. Love was the easy part. It was the vulnerability that terrified me. The idea that choosing him meant choosing uncertainty, choosing to be seen fully, choosing to risk real loss instead of theoretical pain. I sat on the floor of the living room, back against the couch, lights off, city noise humming faintly through the window. For the first time, I let myself imagine what would have happened if I'd been braver. Not a perfect future, just an honest one. I don't know yet if realizing that changes anything. I don't know if understanding fear means you automatically know how to overcome it. But something shifted that night, not forward, not backward, just deeper. And for the first time since we ended, the thought of loving him again didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a truth I might someday be strong enough to live with. A month passed, then another. Enough time that people stopped asking how I was doing with that careful tone, like they were testing a bruise. I started saying better and almost believing it. My routines came back: first work, gym, dinners that didn't taste like cardboard anymore. Healing, I learned, doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in disguised as normalcy. Caleb stayed present in small ways. A meme sent late at night. This made me think of you." Text about a song we both loved. Nothing overt. Nothing that crossed the invisible line we'd drawn. Sometimes I wished he would push harder. Sometimes I was grateful he didn't. Both feelings could exist at once, and that realization alone exhausted me. I went on a date. Just one. A guy named Aaron with kind eyes and an easy laugh. He asked thoughtful questions. He listened. When he touched my arm, it felt fine. Neutral. Like my body was cooperating out of politeness. I smiled, nodded, did all the right things, and went home with a strange hollow calm instead of disappointment. That scared me more than heartbreak ever had. Caleb called me that same night. I stared at my phone while it rang, pulse ticking up like it already knew. I almost didn't answer. Old habits die hard. "Hey," he said when I did. His voice still had that grounding effect on me, like gravity remembered my name. We talked about nothing at first. Work stress. A neighbor of his who played music too loud. The weather turning earlier than expected. Eventually the silence grew heavier, not awkward, just honest. "I think I messed up," he said quietly. My instinct was to fix it, to reassure him. Instead, I asked how. "I was so afraid of pushing you," he said, "that I never asked what you were actually afraid of." That landed deep. Too deep to deflect. I didn't know how to explain it, I admitted. I barely understood it myself. He didn't rush me. That was always his strength. We met a few days later at a park we used to walk through on Sundays. Neutral ground. Safe. The air was crisp. Leaves just started to turn. We sat on a bench with space between us, not distance, just awareness. I was scared of losing myself, I said finally. Of becoming someone who needed something too much. Of loving you more than I trusted myself. Caleb nodded slowly. "I was scared you'd never choose me fully. That I'd always be waiting for you to decide I was worth a risk." Neither of us argued. There was nothing to defend anymore. We didn't make promises that day. We didn't kiss. We didn't label anything. We just sat there, two people finally brave enough to name the fear that had been running the show all along. And as we stood to leave, something felt different, not fixed, not resolved, but lighter. Like fear had lost its anonymity. Like love, for the first time, wasn't fighting alone. I walked home with that feeling settling into me slowly. Not hope exactly. Something quieter. Something steadier. The understanding that sometimes beginnings don't look like grand gestures. Sometimes they look like honesty, spoken a little too late, but not too late to matter. We didn't rush back into each other after that conversation. If anything, we slowed down more. Texts became longer, but less frequent. Calls happened without urgency, sometimes just to sit in silence together while we both did other things. It felt intentional, like we were rebuilding something fragile without pretending it was indestructible. I started noticing how fear showed up in my life beyond Caleb. In meetings where I stayed quiet, even when I had something to say. In friendships where I kept things light to avoid needing too much. Love hadn't created the fear, it had just exposed it. That realization was uncomfortable in a way that felt necessary. One evening, Caleb asked if he could come over. Not casually, not impulsively. He asked like it mattered what the answer was. When he stood in my doorway, hands in his jacket pockets, I felt the echo of everything we'd been without being swallowed by it. We hugged, careful at first, then tighter like muscle memory filling in the gaps logic couldn't reach yet. I don't want to repeat the same version of us, he said once we were sitting on opposite ends of the couch again. Even if that version loved each other. I nodded. Me neither. We talked for hours. About therapy. About old patterns. About how love without safety can feel like a threat instead of a refuge. There were moments where emotion pressed hard against my ribs, but I didn't shut down. I stayed. That felt new. At some point, Caleb reached for my hand, not to pull me closer, just to connect. I let him. The contact was simple, grounding, no fireworks, just warmth. I'm still scared, I admitted. Me too, he said, but I don't want fear to be the loudest voice anymore. Neither did I. When he left that night, he kissed my cheek instead of my mouth. It felt oddly intimate, like restraint chosen instead of forced. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it. Not overwhelmed, just full. Lying in bed later, I thought about how different this felt from the beginning. There was no rush now. No fantasy version of the future to chase or avoid. Just two people learning how to stand still without running. We hadn't gotten back together. Not officially, but something had shifted into place, quietly, like furniture rearranged in the dark. The space felt more honest, even if it was still uncertain. For the first time, fear wasn't sitting between us. It was beside us, acknowledged, smaller, no longer pretending to be a warning sign. And as sleep finally pulled me under, I realized something gently, but clearly. Loving him had never been a risk. Refusing to be brave had been. We eased back into each other the way you test water with your toes before stepping in. Carefully, deliberately. Some weeks we saw each other twice. Some weeks not at all. And strangely, the distance didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt chosen. One Sunday afternoon, Caleb and I cooked together for the first time since the breakup. Nothing fancy. Pasta, roasted vegetables, a bottle of wine we didn't open. We moved around the kitchen with that familiar choreography, reaching past each other, bumping hips lightly, smiling without comment. It felt intimate in a way nothing else ever quite captured, domestic, unguarded, real. At one point he paused, knife hovering midair, and said, I used to think love meant certainty. Like if I felt scared, it meant something was wrong. I leaned against the counter. I used to think fear meant I was about to lose myself. We looked at each other then, not sad, not hopeful, just honest. Two interpretations of the same emotion, finally translated. Later, sitting on the floor with our backs against the cabinets, plates balanced on our knees, he asked me something that made my chest tighten in a new way. If we try again, he said, it can't be about fixing what we were. It has to be about choosing who we are now. The old version of me would have stalled, joked, asked for more time. Instead, I nodded slowly. I don't want guarantees, I said. I just don't want to hide anymore. That felt like the truest promise I could offer. When he reached out this time, it wasn't tentative. His hand wrapped around mine, steady and warm, like he trusted me to stay. And I did. I stayed with the fear, with the uncertainty, with him. We kissed that night, not urgently, not like we were reclaiming something. It was soft, almost shy, like a first kiss that knew too much already. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine, breathing slow, matching me without trying. "I'm still scared," he whispered. "So am I," I answered. And for once, that felt like common ground instead of a warning sign. After he left, I cleaned the kitchen alone, the sound of running water grounding me. My reflection in the dark window looked calmer somehow. Not fearless, just present. Lying in bed later, I understood something that had taken me years to learn. Fear doesn't disappear when you do the right thing. It just stops being in control. And loving someone, really loving them, means deciding that the possibility of loss isn't a reason to keep your life small. As sleep came, that truth settled gently into me. Not loud, not dramatic, just solid enough to carry me forward. Trying again didn't feel like a reset. There was no illusion of a clean slate, no pretending we hadn't already hurt each other. It felt more like reopening a book we'd dog-eared and underlined, choosing to read it slower this time, aware of where the pages used to tear. We didn't announce anything. To friends, to coworkers, even to ourselves. We just showed up. Caleb would come over after work, kick off his shoes, sit beside me without asking. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we watched the same episode of a show 3 nights in a row because neither of us wanted to commit to something new yet. I noticed how often I checked in with myself now. When my chest tightened, I didn't immediately retreat. I paused, asked what I was actually afraid of. Most of the time, the answer wasn't Caleb at all. It was the possibility of being fully known and still not guaranteed safety. Naming that didn't make it disappear, but it stopped it from hijacking the moment. One evening, we lay on opposite sides of the bed, not touching, the space between us deliberate. The room was quiet except for traffic far below. "Do you ever worry we're just delaying the inevitable?" I asked. It slipped out before I could soften it. Caleb rolled onto his side to face me. He didn't look defensive, just thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said, "but I worry more about what happens if we don't try while we still want to." That landed gently, but firmly, like truth usually does. I turned toward him then, closing the space we'd been guarding. He wrapped an arm around me, not tight, not possessive, just there. My breathing slowed before I even noticed it happening. Fear still existed, but it no longer felt like a verdict. Just information. Weeks passed, then months. We had disagreements, real ones this time. About time, about priorities, about how much reassurance was too much and how much silence was too little. But instead of withdrawing, we stayed in the room. That alone felt revolutionary. One night, as we brushed our teeth side by side, I caught our reflection in the mirror. Not a highlight reel moment. Just us. Comfortable. Tired. Real. And something in me settled. Later, lying in the dark, Caleb's hand resting on my stomach, I realized I wasn't bracing for loss the way I used to. I knew it was possible. I just wasn't letting that possibility shrink what we had. We hadn't conquered fear. We'd learned how to live with it without letting it decide for us. And as sleep pulled me under, I understood something quietly. Finally, this wasn't the ending we'd been afraid of. It was the life that started once we stopped running. A year passed without either of us marking it. No anniversary. No remember when. Just time doing what time does best, testing things quietly. I noticed the change not in the big moments, but in the small ones I used to dread. Introducing him as my partner without rehearsing it first. Letting him see me frustrated, unpolished, uncertain, and not rushing to clean it up. Fear still visited. It always will, I think, but it stopped arriving disguised as logic. It showed up honestly now, as a feeling instead of a directive. I could say, "I'm scared," without it meaning I was halfway out the door. And Caleb learned to hear that sentence without flinching. One night, lying awake beside him, I asked, "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing this?" He turned his head toward me, eyes half open. "Sometimes," he said, "but I don't think about it as almost losing you anymore. I think about it as almost never learning how to stay." That stayed with me. How fear hadn't tried to hurt us, it had tried to protect us, just badly. Too aggressively, like a guard dog that didn't know when to stand down. Learning to love Caleb didn't mean getting rid of that instinct. It meant teaching a new job. We built a life that wasn't flashy. Shared grocery lists. Inside jokes no one else would ever understand. Arguments that ended in resolution instead of retreat. I stopped measuring safety by how little I felt. I started measuring it by how honest I could be and still be met with care. The day we finally talked about the breakup openly, not as a wound, but as history, I realized something quietly monumental. I wasn't ashamed of who I'd been anymore. The scared version of me hadn't been weak. He'd just been unpracticed at courage. Sometimes I think about the alternate timeline, the one where we walked away for good, where love stayed unresolved, preserved in memory instead of lived. I don't judge that version of us anymore. He did the best he could with the tools he had. But I'm grateful we didn't stop there. We didn't break up because the love wasn't enough. We broke up because fear convinced us it was dangerous to want something fully. And then, slowly, imperfectly, we learned that love isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to stay anyway. Now, when Caleb's hand finds mine in the dark, there's no spike of panic, no mental exit plan forming in the background. Just warmth, just presence, just the quiet knowledge that choosing someone doesn't erase who you are, it reveals who you've been protecting all along. And this time, I don't pull away. I stay.